a young girl was left home alone for a short while, only to vanish without a trace. What followed felt more like the plot of a gripping detective thriller than a real-life event. It was simply too shocking to believe something like this could truly happen. It would take 15 long years before the truth finally came to light. And when it did, the entire community was left in shock and outrage. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2nd, 1982, in the small, close-knit town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. It was a quiet, rural place where most residents worked in farming and knew one another well. Jessica was the eldest sibling with 2 younger brothers, and from a young age, she helped care for them while her parents worked. This responsibility made her independent, and her parents always trusted her completely. At 15, she took a part-time job at a local restaurant, determined to save up for her dream car, a red Pontiac. Over the years, she diligently put money aside until she finally had enough to make her dream a reality. Despite juggling work and school, Jessica excelled academically. She had big plans to attend college after graduation and pursue a career in accounting. By the fall of 1999, at 17, she was entering her senior year of high school. Around this time, she also started dating someone, which made her even more excited about the future. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, Jessica's day started off like any other. Her parents left for work while she was still asleep, and her younger brothers caught the school bus. Jessica stayed behind, planning to drive herself to school shortly after. Around noon, her mother returned home and immediately sensed something was off. Jessica's car was still parked in front of the house. Strange, since she should have been in class. Concerned, her mother entered the house and checked Jessica's bedroom, thinking she might have overslept. But the room was empty. Next, she wondered if Jessica had asked her father for a ride instead. However, after calling him, she learned that he had gone to work alone that morning. Worried, she decided to check Jessica's car, thinking it might not have started that morning. She grabbed a spare key from inside the house and walked outside. But as she approached, a chilling sight stopped her in her tracks. The driver's door was slightly ajar, and inside, Jessica's cell phone lay on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 already dialed. Beneath the driver's seat, one of Jessica's shoes and her keys were left behind. In the back seat, her school books, work uniform, and purse remained untouched. The disturbing scene painted a grim picture. It was clear someone had interrupted her as she tried to call for help. Jessica would never have willingly left all her belongings behind. The family lived on the outskirts of town, so if she had gone anywhere on foot, she would have had to walk for miles. Her parents immediately called the school, only to discover that Jessica had never made it to class. Strangely, the school had failed to notify them of her absence, as it should have. Their worry deepened when Jessica's best friend from the restaurant called later that day, asking why she hadn't shown up for her shift. Between her absence at school and work, the abandoned car, and the phone with 9 and 1 dialed, Jessica's parents knew something was terribly wrong. They wasted no time in contacting the police. But when they finally reached the sheriff, they were met with indifference. He brushed off their concerns, suggesting Jessica had simply wandered off and would return soon. He didn't even acknowledge the glaring evidence, like the single shoe left behind, making it nearly impossible for her to have gone far. Jessica's parents pleaded with the sheriff to take the situation seriously, but he refused to open an investigation. Frustrated and heartbroken, they had no choice but to return home. But they weren't ready to give up. Determined to find their daughter, they took matters into their own hands, reaching out to friends, relatives, and anyone who might have seen Jessica. Yet, no one had any answers. Together, they scoured the town in search of Jessica, but she was nowhere to be found. The next morning, her worried parents returned to the sheriff's office and reported that Jessica still hadn't made it home. This time, the sheriff sent 2 officers to inspect her car. However, her parents soon encountered yet another issue. The officers conducted their examination without wearing gloves, carelessly handling everything inside the vehicle with their bare hands. Worse still, they neglected to check Jessica's room, despite it being standard procedure. Feeling once again abandoned by law enforcement, Jessica's parents turned to the local media in a desperate attempt to bring attention to their daughter's disappearance and highlight the police's apparent lack of concern. With the support of relatives and friends, they launched their own search efforts, distributing flyers that contained crucial information about Jessica. Leading the search were her father and his brother Stanley, both of whom were familiar with the area. Fearing the worst, they decided to focus their search near a local river, an area notorious for attracting drug dealers and criminals due to its overgrown, secluded landscape. For hours, Jessica's family combed through the rough terrain near the river, but they found no sign of her. Then, the following morning, something deeply unsettling happened. While Jessica's parents were at home, their son was playing outside in the yard when he suddenly ran inside, visibly shaken. He claimed he had heard a cry for help, one that sounded just like Jessica's voice. Acting on instinct, Jessica's father grabbed his shotgun and rushed outside, determined to find the source of the cry. At that same moment, his brother pulled up to the house and immediately joined in the search. As they scanned the area, something caught their attention, a plume of smoke rising from a neighboring property. The land belonged to a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. As they got closer, they saw him burning something that looked eerily similar to clothing. The sight sent chills down their spines. Suspicious, Jessica's father approached Brooks and requested permission to search his property. Brooks, however, flatly refused and ordered them to leave. But that wasn't the only unsettling thing about him. Before Jessica's disappearance, her family had shared a relatively normal relationship with Brooks and his relatives. Yet after she went missing, his behavior took a disturbing turn. He began driving past their house slowly and frequently, staring at them with an unsettling, almost taunting smile. Jessica's parents also started receiving eerie anonymous phone calls where the caller remained silent, breathing heavily on the other end. They suspected Brooks was behind it, but they couldn't understand why. After witnessing Brooks burning clothes on his property, Jessica's parents once again turned to the police, who had shown little interest in the case from the beginning. They urged the officers to search Brooks' property with cadaver dogs, and this time the police agreed. Using Jessica's clothing to pick up her scent, the dogs led investigators straight to Brooks' fire pit, but frustratingly, no solid evidence was found. However, the dogs also uncovered a pair of black gloves inside one of Brooks's sheds. The gloves emitted an odor associated with decomposition, raising even more red flags. Despite these alarming discoveries and Brooks's increasingly suspicious behavior, the police once again failed to link him to Jessica's disappearance, leaving her parents with more questions than answers. Frustrated by the local authorities' inaction, Jessica's father made a bold decision. He reached out to the FBI. Typically, the Bureau does not launch investigations solely based on requests from missing persons' relatives. But this time, given the disturbing circumstances surrounding Jessica's case, they agreed to step in without hesitation. After carefully reviewing the details provided by Jessica's parents, the FBI came to a chilling conclusion. Something truly horrific may have happened to her. From that moment on, a real investigation finally began. The kind of thorough inquiry that local law enforcement had failed to conduct. FBI agents meticulously collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and vehicle, seizing all potential evidence for forensic analysis. They also deployed helicopters and enlisted volunteers to assist in a massive ground search. Even the pond near Jessica's home was thoroughly examined as investigators considered the possibility that her body might have been hidden there. Then, as the FBI combed through Brooks's property with a level of scrutiny the local police had never applied, they uncovered something truly alarming. Inside one of the sheds, investigators uncovered a chilling piece of evidence: a printed photo of Jessica. This disturbing discovery made detectives almost certain that Brooks was involved in her disappearance. They also began to suspect his 35-year-old brother Joseph, who exhibited odd behavior while the police were searching the property. However, there was a major obstacle. Despite their suspicions, the investigation had yet to produce any concrete evidence substantial enough to justify arresting either of the brothers. With no other leads, authorities intensified their search efforts, convinced that Jessica was no longer alive. Then, on September 27th, 17 days after Jessica went missing, the police received a call that would change everything. A woman was driving along a road near the river, the same area where Jessica's father had desperately searched in the early days of her disappearance. As she passed by, she noticed something unusual near a tree just off the road. Curious, she decided to take a closer look. As she approached, a horrifying realization set in. The object resembled a human body. Without hesitation, she dialed 911. FBI agents rushed to the scene, and their worst fears were confirmed. The lifeless body of a young woman lay before them, badly decomposed and missing several fingers and limbs. A rope, streaked with red and silver paint, was tied tightly around her legs. Parts of her clothing were also missing, leading investigators to suspect she had been sexually assaulted. Due to the body's advanced state of decomposition, authorities were unable to immediately confirm whether it was Jessica. The police then visited her parents and asked for their help in identifying her remains. Overcome with grief, Jessica's father couldn't bring himself to look, but her mother, gathering all the strength she had, agreed to go to the scene. At first, she struggled to recognize her daughter, but then her eyes fell upon something unmistakable. A small butterfly tattoo, identical to Jessica's, located in the exact same spot. The painful truth became undeniable. Later, forensic experts officially confirmed Jessica's identity and determined her cause of death: strangulation. The examination also revealed multiple bruises, indicating she had suffered a brutal attack before dying. Even more disturbingly, medical experts concluded that her limbs and fingers had been removed post-mortem, meaning she had been alive when her ordeal began. Yet the most devastating revelation was still to come. Investigators discovered that Jessica had remained alive for approximately 3 days after she was abducted. This meant that if the police had acted sooner, they might have been able to save her. Instead, their inaction had sealed her fate. Following the grim discovery, the FBI decided to interrogate Brooks once more. This time, his story took a suspicious turn. During his initial interview, he had claimed he saw Jessica near her home on the morning she vanished. But now, he completely changed his statement, insisting that he hadn't seen her at all that day. His new version of events placed him at home, in bed with his wife that morning. However, when detectives questioned his wife separately, she contradicted his account. Sensing the pressure mounting, the FBI pushed further. They asked Brooks what he would do if his fingerprints were found on Jessica's body. His response sent chills down their spines. Although no such evidence had been discovered, Brooks hesitated and then made an alarming statement. If his fingerprints were found, he would have to confess to everything. Shortly after, he was subjected to a polygraph test, and he failed. With suspicions at an all-time high, the FBI made a bold decision. Despite the lack of solid physical evidence, they arrested Brooks and proceeded with the trial. However, they knew the case would be an uphill battle. While the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, it wasn't definitive. Without concrete proof directly linking Brooks to Jessica's murder, the odds of securing a guilty verdict remained uncertain. As the trial preparations progressed, detectives continued their search for additional evidence that could strengthen the case. While reviewing past findings, investigators recalled an intriguing detail. During their search of Brooks' car, they had discovered a rope strikingly similar to the one used to tie the victim's legs. However, without any DNA evidence on it, the rope remained yet another piece of circumstantial evidence rather than definitive proof. The trial commenced in January 2003. Brooks's attorney vehemently argued that there was no concrete evidence linking his client to the crime, insisting on his innocence. Then, a crucial misstep by law enforcement came to light during the proceedings. When investigators first discovered Jessica's body, they also found several of her missing limbs nearby. These remains were placed in specialized containers and handed over to the local police for safekeeping. However, despite clear labels instructing officers to store them in a refrigerated environment, the boxes were instead left at room temperature. As a result, the remains decomposed extensively, destroying any potential DNA traces that might have identified the killer. With no solid forensic evidence and only weak circumstantial links, the case against Brooks was far from airtight. Ultimately, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and Brooks walked free. According to state law, he could only be charged again if new, undeniable evidence emerged. For Jessica's parents, the verdict was a crushing blow. In their minds, there was little doubt that Brooks was responsible for their daughter's murder. To make matters worse, they were haunted by the thought that if the police had taken the case more seriously from the start, Jessica might have been saved. Now, with no justice in sight, their last hope faded entirely. As years passed, Jessica's case remained unsolved, and eventually it was nearly forgotten. Then, in 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department. Tasked with investigating cold cases, she soon turned her attention to the murder of Jessica Dishon. As she sifted through the case files, she was shocked by the sheer negligence of her predecessors. The records were riddled with errors, crucial conversations with key individuals were missing, and the handling of evidence was embarrassingly inadequate. It became clear that the case had been so poorly managed that Hunt had no choice but to start the investigation from scratch, despite the fact that 13 years had already passed since Jessica's murder. Her first step was to speak with Jessica's family. One of Jessica's brothers, now an adult living on his own, handed Hunt a box of his sister's belongings, items that had originally been in Jessica's car. He had kept them ever since the police had returned them to the family. Hunt was once again astounded by the lack of professionalism in the investigation. These items, which should have been preserved as evidence, had not been stored according to protocol. Now, after so many years, they were unlikely to yield any useful clues. Nevertheless, Hunt examined everything carefully, determined not to overlook a single detail. Then she came across something interesting, a copy of Brooks' medical evaluation. According to the report, his IQ was only 61, which is considered extremely low. This revelation raised serious questions about the way the police had handled his interrogation. Given his intellectual limitations, Brooks might not have fully understood many of the questions posed to him. His odd behavior, which had previously been considered suspicious, could very well have been a result of his cognitive impairment rather than guilt. This new perspective led Hunt to consider a shocking possibility. What if Brooks had nothing to do with Jessica's murder? What if the real killer had never even been investigated? Determined to find the truth, Hunt launched a fresh inquiry. She meticulously reviewed all individuals connected to the case, as well as people living in the area at the time of Jessica's disappearance. Her investigation continued until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, when an unexpected lead emerged. A fellow officer from another department reached out to Hunt with intriguing news. An inmate at a Kentucky state prison had come forward, claiming to know the true identity of Jessica Dishon's murderer. Hunt approached this tip with cautious skepticism. In her experience, inmates often fabricated stories in hopes of bargaining for reduced sentences or better prison conditions. More often than not, such leads proved to be nothing more than time-wasting dead ends. Still, she knew she couldn't afford to dismiss it without verification. Determined to follow every possible lead, Hunt made her way to the prison to meet the informant. The man revealed that he had once shared a cell with another inmate, a convict who had been sentenced for child abuse, the very same crime he himself had committed. Bound by shared experiences, the two inmates developed a twisted friendship, occasionally exchanging details about their past crimes. Then, one day, the cellmate made a shocking confession. Among other things, he claimed to have murdered Jessica Dishon. But what came next left Detective Hunt utterly stunned. The informant revealed the name of the man responsible for Jessica's death. It was none other than Stanley Dishon, Jessica's uncle and her father's own brother. According to the inmate, Stanley had confided in him, admitting that he had been sexually abusing Jessica for years while living under the same roof as her family. He had threatened her repeatedly. warning that if she ever told anyone, he would kill her or harm someone she loved. By the spring of 1999, Stanley grew increasingly paranoid. Jessica had started dating someone, and he feared that she might finally confess to her boyfriend about the abuse. Desperate to silence her, Stanley took action. On the morning of September 10th, he arrived at Jessica's home while she was alone. She was outside, getting into her car, her belongings already packed inside. Stanley confronted her, demanding that she end her relationship immediately. But Jessica refused. She had had enough, and this time she fought back. She threatened to expose him if he didn't leave her alone. Panic set in. Stanley lashed out, issuing more threats. Jessica turned to grab the phone, intending to call 911. Realizing that his entire world could come crashing down, Stanley lunged at her. Jessica managed to break free and ran into the house, but he chased after her. Once inside, he followed her to her bedroom, struck her, and tightly bound her in her own bedsheets. Then, he carried her away to an abandoned shed, just a short distance from where her body would later be found. For several agonizing days, Stanley kept Jessica captive, subjecting her to unimaginable abuse and torture. Then, he ended her life. But his cruelty didn't stop there. He moved her body, placing it in a visible spot near the road, ensuring that it would eventually be discovered. Hoping to mislead investigators, he went even further, removing some of Jessica's limbs to make it appear as if her death had been the work of drug traffickers. Before leaving the scene, he buried the bedsheets beneath the shed, erasing the last traces of his crime. Detective Hunt was shaken. The details provided by the informant were eerily specific, details that had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest relatives knew about the missing limbs, meaning the inmate couldn't have fabricated that part of the story. Then, he revealed one final piece of information. Stanley had buried one of Jessica's shoes beneath a broken tree near the shed. If this was true, Hunt finally had a chance to prove his guilt. Determined to verify the claims, Hunt launched an independent search. But with limited resources at the local police department, she had no choice but to seek help elsewhere. She turned to Jessica's brother and a few other relatives who agreed to assist in the search. Not wanting to alarm them prematurely, Hunt chose not to disclose that Stanley was now the prime suspect. First, she needed concrete evidence. On the first day, the search was fruitless. In the midst of pouring rain, they dug through the areas matching the informant's description, but nothing surfaced. The next day, Hunt and Jessica's brother returned to the site with renewed determination. As they drove along the road, he pointed out an abandoned barn. Something about it caught Hunt's attention. They stopped the car, entered the barn, and started digging the soil inside. Almost immediately, they uncovered something buried beneath the dirt. A long-awaited breakthrough. It was a bedsheet. Hunt carefully collected the evidence and rushed to Jessica's home. Over the years, Jessica's parents had never changed a single thing in her bedroom. It remained frozen in time, exactly as it was on the day she disappeared. Thanks to this, Hunt was able to confirm a crucial detail. The bedsheet they had just found matched Jessica's bedding. It was missing from her bed, and the pattern was identical to the remaining linen. For the first time in 15 years, the truth was finally coming to light. Immediately after this breakthrough, Stanley was arrested and brought in for questioning. Though he refused to confess, he appeared visibly shaken during his conversation with detectives. Eventually, he was formally charged with murder, and the case moved to trial. Jessica's father struggled to comprehend the horrifying truth that his own brother had committed such an unspeakable crime against his daughter. At first, he was in complete denial, unable to accept the reality of the situation. But over time, he was forced to come to terms with it. Looking back, he recalled something that now seemed painfully suspicious. During the initial days of Jessica's disappearance, it had been Stanley who suggested searching near the river. But while they were out there, Stanley suddenly claimed to feel sick, and his brother had to drive him home. It turned out that this moment had occurred just a few hundred yards from the barn where Jessica had been hidden. This raised a chilling possibility. Stanley may have deliberately diverted the search efforts, ensuring that no one would find Jessica while she was still alive. As preparations for the trial continued, Detective Hunt delved deeper into Stanley's past, hoping to uncover additional evidence. She already knew that he had previously served time for assaulting another young girl within their family. But what she uncovered next was even more disturbing. Multiple women, each closely related to Stanley, came forward revealing that he had sexually abused them when they were children. A clear pattern emerged. Stanley would approach his relatives, claiming to have nowhere to stay, and they would allow him to live with them temporarily. But once alone with their daughters, he took advantage of the situation, using threats to ensure their silence. After hearing these testimonies, investigators concluded that Stanley had been preying on young girls within his own family for 3 decades. Despite these revelations, Hunt knew that securing a conviction for Jessica's murder would be difficult. The case still lacked definitive forensic evidence. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and nothing to physically tie Stanley to the crime. Determined to leave no stone unturned, she continued combing through old case files, searching for anything that might strengthen the prosecution's case. That's when she made another shocking discovery. In a box of forgotten records, Hunt came across a letter dated June 26, 2002. It had been written by a different informant, someone who, 12 years before, had told the police the same story that Hunt had just uncovered from the Kentucky prison inmate. By that time, Stanley was already serving a sentence for assaulting an underage relative. While in prison, he had confessed to his cellmate that he was the one who had murdered Jessica. The cellmate, who happened to be a police informant, sent a detailed letter to the department handling the case, outlining everything Stanley had told him. And what did the police do? Nothing. They ignored the letter, likely because they were still convinced that Brooks was the real culprit. Instead of investigating further, they dismissed the informant's claims, failing to consider any other suspects. Hunt was once again appalled by the negligence of her predecessors. If they had taken their job seriously, Jessica's case could have been solved back in 2002. But now, after all these years, all she could do was wait for the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face the justice he had evaded for so long. The trial began in 2015. Despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Stanley insisted he was innocent. Seated in the courtroom, Jessica's parents could hardly bear to look at him. The man who had shared their family dinners, their holidays, their lives, was the same man who had destroyed everything. Their anger only deepened as he continued to deny the crime, refusing to give them even a shred of closure. Prosecutors knew that convicting Stanley of murder would be difficult. The case against him was largely circumstantial, with no direct physical evidence to secure a guilty verdict. There was also another complication. The women Stanley had assaulted as children would need to testify in court, recounting in painful detail the horrors they had endured. Given these challenges, the prosecution made a decision. They offered Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for his full confession to both Jessica's murder and the sexual assaults, they would drop the possibility of the death penalty. In the end, Stanley agreed. He pleaded guilty. But there was one condition. He wouldn't be required to reveal any further details about the crimes. Jessica's parents were devastated. After waiting for justice for nearly 15 years, they still didn't get the answers they so desperately sought. Why had he done it? What had really happened in those final moments? Stanley remained silent, offering them nothing. Under the terms of the plea deal, Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Given that he was already 56 at the time of sentencing, this meant that he could walk free at 71. After the trial, Jessica's father made a chilling promise. If his brother ever got out of prison, he would be waiting for him. And this time, he would take justice into his own hands. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview from prison, claiming once again that he was innocent. According to him, he had been at work on the morning Jessica disappeared. But after 2 decades, verifying his alibi was impossible. He also failed to explain how two unrelated informants, separated by more than a decade, had come forward with identical confessions from him, including details that only the true murderer would know, such as the location of the buried bedsheet. As for David Brooks, detectives never fully ruled out the possibility that he played a minor role in the crime. Brooks and Stanley knew each other, and it was entirely possible that Stanley had asked him to help dispose of Jessica's belongings. Given Brooks's low IQ, he may not have fully understood what was happening. Perhaps he had been the one to burn Jessica's clothes in the fire, or maybe Stanley had given him the gloves, contaminated with Jessica's scent, causing the cadaver dogs to alert. There was even a small possibility that Brooks had deliberately placed Jessica's photo in Stanley's shed, attempting to shift suspicion. But the full truth will likely never be known. Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart complications, taking any remaining secrets to the grave. One final mystery remains: the haunting moment when, on the third day of Jessica's disappearance, her younger brother heard a cry for help outside. He was convinced it was his sister. To this day, no one knows the truth. Was Jessica still alive at that time, held captive in the barn just a few miles away? Perhaps the child had imagined it, his mind playing tricks on him under extreme stress. Or maybe it was someone else's voice that he mistook for Jessica's. Yet, there is one unsettling theory. We know that right after Jessica's father ran outside in response to the cry, Stanley pulled up to the house. He had been nearby. Could it be that Jessica had been in his car at that exact moment, bound, gagged, or unconscious? It seems unlikely. But in a case like this, where so much negligence and deception clouded the truth, anything is possible. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.